Welcome back, my fellow pioneers in the space between the picket lines. Today's discussion delves into 3 strong and steady genre proofs of humanity. Now, these genres take what we have already discussed in this series and launches things into a whole other stratosphere. Additionally, I have some very exciting news coming at the end of this video, so we just got all kinds of fantastic goodies to delve into today. Thus, into the fantastic structure of truths we descend. Greetings and blessings to all of you beautiful souls. Hopefully you're having a wonderful night or day thus far, and thank you very kindly for joining me on today's episode of The Genesis of Conception. Now, in our last video, we actually discussed the stages of fetal development, link down below if you're interested, and now you and I are going to look at the proofs of humanity in what I like to call genre style. So, there are 3 big genres, and they actually work interlinked within one another. There's the scientific, there's the philosophical, and then there is something that's been dubbed the SLED test. So, starting with science, because that is how we roll around here, I introduce you to a gentleman named Steve Wagner. He's the executive director of Justice for All, which focuses on training and speaking and outreach between the party lines when it comes to abortion versus life-saving measures for both the mother and also the baby, which is fantastic. Now, he has got a rather impressive resume, and he has poured over 1,000 hours into this endeavor, including doing some incredible work all over the country. Now, he outlined for you and I, and for everyone else, 3 basic scientific proofs for testing the humanity of the child within the womb. They are first living, second human, and third whole. Now, you're going to notice that 3 is a recurring idea here, so bear along. So, proof 1, living. Wagner pays specific attention to something called cellular reproductivity, and thanks to Oregon State University's Science Department Research Facility, yay them, we have got an easy way to classify what cellular reproductivity actually means. So essentially, we humans were these multicellular organisms with independent cells that work in concert together. Now, additionally, all living structures of human anatomy contain cells, and almost all functions of human physiology are performed in cells or initiated by cells. So cells, super duper important. Now this is key, because as we know, compliments of the British Society for Cellbiology.org, the cells of any person hold all kinds of answers. My cells and your cells can actually connect our past to our present. Think ancestry, for instance. Cells can also shed light on your level of health versus your probability of contracting any kind of disease. Think Alzheimer's disease or cystic fibrosis, to name just a few, although I pray that you never have to experience those things. And cells even play a role in proving the innocence of guilt, or the innocence or the guilt of a person. So think molecular DNA testing to clear someone of an accusation. So you'd probably have seen that on your favorite crime drama if you watch those types of things. Now, cells and their ability to reproduce hold the key to determining an uncountable number of things about any given person. So now, translating that to the womb. If you take the cells from a growing baby in the womb, you're going to find that they will register from the get-go as human DNA, and that they can do all the same things that the cells of an already born human, such as yourself, can do. Now, additionally, in the process of growth within the womb, that child's cells are going to be reproducing at an incredible rate, because of course, they only got 9 months to grow. They gotta do a whole lot of stuff. Ergo, that child does in fact meet the requirements of Wagner's scientific proof number 1. But what about proof number 2? They have to be human. Now, I know this is a big source of contention, so let's break it on down. Wagner brings light to human DNA and human parentage, which I actually went into pretty great depth about in my first video, also down below. But to recap, since we know scientifically that separate species cannot interbreed, then logically, if a woman is pregnant, she had to have gotten pregnant by a human male's sperm. Now, since two humans procreating cannot scientifically produce anything but another human, then the species within a human woman's womb must be a human child. There is no scientifically logical alternative. Therefore, with that said, the child meets the requirements of Wagner's scientific proof number 2. But we only got 1 and 2. What about proof number 3? That would be whole. This one's a bit weirder, but keep track because it's really neat once you think about it. For this, Wagner outlines a few criteria that have to be met. First is nutrition, second is environment, and third is time allowed for development. See, the rule of 3s. To translate, if the life within the womb is given proper nutrition and is given a proper environment and is allowed the proper time to develop, then once the woman gives birth, it will be to a fully formed human baby. Now, of course, birth defects definitely exist, but I'd like to put up the argument that neither you nor I nor any reasonable person would ever look at a deformed person that we met in everyday life, whether that be someone who's got like a missing leg from birth or someone who's missing an arm from birth or anything like that, and tell them that they are anything other than a whole human being. Thus, the preborn child does in fact meet the requirements for Wagner's scientific proof number 3. So, I know that was a lot of information. Here's the recap. The scientific proofs of humanity. The child in the womb must be living and human and be born whole, which he or she most definitely is and will be. And if you want another fun example of that, we've got Anne from the Stages of Fetal Development video that is linked down below as one pretty neat reference to all of that. Now on to the philosophical proof. This one is actually fairly simple and it just boils down to one strong concept. Philosophically, there is no difference between a child in the womb and a living human being such as yourself or me after birth that does not also draw a line somewhere within the general populace. So for this one, I'm going to give you a few examples so you can wrap your mind around it a little bit more. The first big one that I hear all the time, especially from the pro-choice community, is dependency on another person. Now, an accurate philosophical response is that yes, absolutely, the baby in the womb is going to be extremely dependent on his or her mother for about 9 months. But it's also very real that we see that sort of thing in disabled people, and most young to early adolescent children, and also quite a few elderly people. For a good reference on this, just look at the havoc that 2020 wrought on homes for the elderly. Now, additionally, I will point out that human beings at maximum dependency, meaning they need everything done for them by another human, everything, they're still very much human. Now, a good way to frame this is that dependency is only actually counted as a negative for those who are still in the womb. See, in every other segment of at least civilized society, when someone needs extra help, maybe it's an old lady on a walker trying to cross the street, maybe it's someone who's trying to get on a bus or something and they're in a wheelchair. For those kinds of people, they're looked on with extreme favor, and it's both the right and the moral thing to do to give them that help. Now, if it's right and moral outside of the womb, it follows that it would also be right and moral within the womb. So that was the first philosophical example. Our second philosophical example. Let's argue from the stance of needing an independently beating heart. Now first, science actually does show that a preborn baby's heart starts to beat at about 3 weeks of fertilization, which I actually did cover in the Stages of Fetal Development video, linked down below. There's a whole lot of really useful information in there for this one, so if you'd like to check that out, feel free to. Second, within the world at large, there are many individuals with heart conditions who require some kind of external mechanism in order to survive. Maybe it's like a heart rate machine, maybe it's something of that variety. Additionally, there are thousands for whom someone else's already beating heart is actually their only solution to continue life. So let me give an example. In 2018 alone, which is the most recent data that was collected by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, there were 3,440 heart transplants, which means that 3,440 people literally needed to have a heart given to them by someone else in order to survive. Since we know that it is correct to count a person with someone else's heart, or with a heart-beating mechanism, as a living human, then we should have zero qualms about giving preborn infants with a beating heart the same kindness with their own hearts. So that is proof 2 on the philosophical side. Then we get to our third philosophical example, which is brain activity. Now, there are those who do make the argument that we cannot prove at what point of pregnancy brain activity officially kicks in. And while this is scientifically inaccurate, you can refer to the Stages of Fetal Development video for that information, it also discounts a good portion of the medically incapacitated world. So, for instance, think of a comatose patient. Sometimes, thankfully, the doctors have a fairly strong idea of when that person might wake up and get to go home and all of that amazing stuff. Sometimes that happens. But sometimes they have to let the family decide to just wait patiently and trust on God's providence, which admittedly can be terrifying and scary, and my heart goes out to all of those families. You can also keep in mind patients dealing with some stage of vegetation. There have been cases where the doctors gave no hope whatsoever, but the family refused to give up, and after some period of time, the person regained control over their own mind and body. An excellent example of this, I read his book after it came out, is Martin Pistorius, which is an incredible true story. Now, we count those people as being alive and worthy of care and love. Therefore, the preborn child should be no different. So, as we can easily see, any philosophical line that one might wish to draw in the sand to say that a preborn child is not a real human, that can also be applied to some segment of the already born population. And we know that it is morally wrong to murder the already born people. Therefore, logic follows that it also must be morally wrong to murder the one in the womb. So there's that. Now finally, we get to a fun acronym called SLED. S-L-E-D. Now this was actually developed by a man by the name of Stephen Schwartz. Now ironically, there's actually a classical music composer who shares the same name, but it's not the same guy. So, SLED for size, level of development, environment, and dependency. StandToReason.org breaks it down incredibly well for us. S for size. Or S for size. A preborn child is definitely smaller at all stages than a toddler, but that does not detract from his or her humanity. Humans are designed by Christ to be in a permanent state of growth in some capacity. Maybe it's their height, your hair, your nails, etc. for our entire lives. Now, cellular reproductivity is one of our top gifts. Also, if you look at it in another light, both midgets and extremely tall people exist, and their uniqueness is hailed and wondered at. Now, admittedly, they've had their fair share of being laughed at and mocked and all that other very unfortunate stuff, but in modern world times, there you go. So, one cannot be disqualified from being human due to diminutive stature in the womb. That's S. Then we get to L for level of development. Similar to how a preborn child is vastly smaller than like a toddler or a teenager, their level of development is going to be far diminished. An easy way to wrap one's mind around this concept is as follows. Humans live for at least 18 to 25 years before our prefrontal cortex is fully developed, which we know thanks to the U.S. National Library of Medicine. In simple terms, that is why teenagers and young adults do so many unwise things. Lord knows I've done my fair share. Now, nobody would ever say that you should be allowed to kill a teenager or a young adult simply for still being in development, which is something that they have absolutely no control over. In the same way, a preborn child is developing constantly and in all kinds of truly incredible ways. Some things might take just a couple of weeks, and then some things take all 9 months. 9, I can't count. Just like the teenagers and the young adults, the preborn children have zero control over how fast they grow, and they should not face execution simply based on not being as developed as a born human. So that is SL. Then we have E for environment. The environment of the preborn child is going to be his or her mother's womb for some period of time. Now, those on the pro-choice side have always said to me some variant of the following thought process. It's the mother's body, so it's her choice what to do with it. Now, that sounds very correct, because of course you'd never want to tell somebody what to do with their own body. But logically translated to, in this context, goes something like this. Its location is undesirable or scary or uncomfortable to those around it. Therefore, they can murder it. So let's take that argument and place it anywhere else on planet Earth. If we gave that logic, and only that logic, while standing trial for a murder anywhere else, the judge would show zero mercy. And why would the judge show zero mercy? Because people know intuitively that it is wrong to kill someone simply because of their location on planet Earth. Simply because that location might be scary, or undesirable, or uncomfortable for the other person involved. So logic dictates, if you cannot do it anywhere else on planet Earth, and rightly so, you shouldn't justify it within the womb either. Now finally, D for dependency. Now this one actually does loop back into our philosophical proofs, but let me expound just a smidgen further on that concept. The preborn child is dependent on the mother for nutrition and a proper environment, which should also sound familiar from the whole organism proof. But let's go up another level. Newborns are still dependent on their parents to provide nutrition and a safe environment. How about maybe a toddler in a swimming pool? We've seen all kinds of videos on those, and fathers and moms being heroes and rescuing little kids. How about any level of growing child in a vehicle or a shopping center or any public space? It is natural for grown-ups and for older siblings and for, babysitters. There's an entire branch of work built around the concept of keeping children safe while they progress in growth. So how about educational needs and self-care needs, even for most adults? We as a species are interdependent upon one another. We are not built to rely solely on ourselves for survival. We require human companionship and bonding and shared experiences and the like, just as much as we require food and water and air and a safe place to live. That's why a very efficient form of torture is complete isolation. That's part of why 2020 was such a gut-wrenching year for most of us. Every single human at any stage of growth is dependent on other people for things every single day. Now, we all realize that this is just a basic, immutable part of life. How on earth do we not collectively extend the same realization to the ones in the womb who need it the most? Now, as you may have noticed, and as I stated at the beginning of this video, these proofs intermingle with one another pretty frequently, and that is the beauty of it. Life was designed and created intentionally to be a stupendously woven and interdependent net of amazing possibilities. To see it in any other light simply doesn't do it justice, and life within the womb is an incredible part of that net. Now next, the surprise. Now, I realized after my last video that you might be someone who wants to do some independent reading on all things pro-life, which I highly recommend. There's so much material out there. And because there's so much material out there, I'm going to start recommending a book to you in each video. Now, of course, all of these books have been vetted and they come highly recommended. That said, today's book is called Unplanned, and it is by Abby Johnson. Now, the short version is that Mrs. Johnson worked as a Planned Parenthood director for a long time, until she actually witnessed an abortion firsthand. And it completely shattered her world. I watched the movie that was based off of the book, and oh my gosh, it is so heart-wrenching, but so incredible. Now, from that moment to the present day, she has been proudly pro-life, and she's built an entire powerful brand around activism and around helping women. Now, I actually got to meet her in person, and she is the sweetest, she's the most humble, she's the most caring type of person you could ask for. Now, I'm recommending her book to you, and there are 2 covers for the book, and they are both on the screen. If listening to books is your thing, you can also find this book on Kindle and Audible and something called Kobo, which is spelled Kobo, and of course, Amazon. And since we discussed Martin Pistorius and I mentioned his book, you can also check out that. It's his autobiography. It's called Ghost Boy, if you would like to do so. Oh, and before I receive any questions on this, none of this is sponsored. That is not my priority at all with any of this. I simply want to get truthful and helpful information out there to you. Now, switching gears, if you or somebody that you know is facing a crisis pregnancy, I've got plenty of resources to guide you to. No judgment, only love and help. For the general populace, I would love to hear your thoughts and your agreements or your disagreements, although if you have disagreements, I just ask that you keep them civil. And also, I would love to hear any prayer requests and praises that you might have. Now, next Saturday, we will look at what abortions actually do in all 3 trimesters, and we're also going to look at the aftermath for women. Now, I know how heavy of a topic that is, but that makes it all the more important to discuss it in an honest, truthful, plain, and open way. Until then, be blessed. Never forget how much our Creator loves you. And here is a friendly reminder that you are welcome here, no matter what your background or beliefs are. Let's be pioneers in the space between picket lines together.